Perhaps you will be surprised to learn that in medieval European society, there were cruel beliefs about the roles of men and women, especially when it came to sex and marriage. In the Middle Ages, much of the attitude towards marriage was determined by the Church. Sex was only permissible between spouses, and there were rules that may seem mind-boggling today. After becoming acquainted with the intimate lives of medieval people, which we have prepared for you, you will be glad that you were not born in those times. In Western Europe, the Church controlled all laws regarding sex, and various religious laws attempted to restrict people. For example, it was forbidden to engage in intimate relationships on Sundays, as it was the Lord's Day, as well as on Thursdays and Fridays, which were meant to be days of preparation for communion. In addition, there were 3 long periods of abstinence that could last from 47 to 62 days before Christmas, at least 35 days during Christmas, and from 50 to 70 days on Whit Sunday. In medieval homes and societies, there was a lack of private spaces where spouses could be alone. It was quite difficult to find a place where they could enjoy themselves. In poor families, the bed was often shared with children and other relatives, while in wealthier homes, servants usually slept in their masters' rooms. But going to bed was not as private an act as it is today. Furthermore, much of the intimate life took place in open spaces, in fields, yards, alleys, even in cemeteries, or in deserted churches and houses in the middle of the day. One of the reasons why kings engaged in public intimate relations was to prove that the infants born to the queens truly belonged to the king, and were therefore legitimate heirs to the throne. Indeed, during the reign of Peter I, there was a specially made bed placed in the viewing room, which can be seen by visiting the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. The most well-known documentary evidence of the first use of a condom belongs to King Minos of Crete, around 300 BC. In those times and even today, the Church considers the use of condoms or anything that interrupts the natural process of ejaculation to be a sin. However, historians have uncovered records indicating that people used condoms even in those times, although it was primarily for the prevention of venereal diseases. But let me tell you that condoms in those times were completely different from what we have today. They were made from bladder, intestines, and flax, and unlike today, they were reusable. Sexual activity in those times was considered a great evil, but a necessary evil for the purpose of procreation. It meant that engaging in sex was allowed, but only because it was necessary for the purpose of having children. You were not supposed to derive pleasure from sex, and if you engaged in sex solely for pleasure, it was considered a great sin. Therefore, now you have become a sinner, and it is necessary for you to repent urgently. Medieval lovemaking was seen as something that men did to women, who allowed or disallowed them to do so during the sexual act. According to the church laws of that time, the man was supposed to be active, while the woman should be passive. It was believed that intimate relations undermined male dominance when the woman was on top of the man during sexual intercourse, and such actions were severely disapproved of. Nevertheless, in spiritual, medical, and narrative sources written by men, women were often portrayed as actively seeking intimate relationships, sometimes resorting to sorcery to get what they desired. In the medieval era, the concept of virginity was not only physical but also spiritual and mental. For the Church, it was enough, even if a girl had thoughts about sex, to consider her virginity lost. Furthermore, similar practices were not only applied to women, but also to men. Sexual satisfaction was considered a sign of the devil entering a person's body, and such actions were deemed unacceptable in an attempt to preserve one's honor. It was believed that the loss of virginity could be restored, and women were solely judged based on their virginity. Virginity was seen as a mark of honor. If a woman lost her virginity, even after marriage, she would pray for its return throughout her life, hoping that nothing had changed. From a religious perspective, a woman could achieve a higher level of spirituality by praying for the restoration of her virginity. The division of people into homosexuals and heterosexuals is a product of the 19th century and was not characteristic of medieval life. However, throughout human history, there have been individuals who were predominantly or exclusively attracted to individuals of the same sex, even if they were not singled out as a separate group. We all know how the Church views homosexuality today, and in the Middle Ages the situation was even worse. If someone in the community was discovered to be homosexual, they were cruelly punished. The punishments were extremely severe, ranging from stoning to burning and hanging. Medieval doctors witnessed too much. Intimate life was a real medical problem. According to commonly accepted beliefs, several nobles died from sexual excesses. Henry Grosmont, the first Duke of Lancaster, allegedly died in the 14th century from genital and bodily decay caused by frequent visits to women, as he was a great fornicator. Today, his symptoms suggest the possibility of syphilis, but contemporaries would likely draw parallels to the case of Ralph, Count of Vermandois. This 10th century French nobleman had recently married his third wife when he fell seriously ill. During his recovery, the doctor advised him to abstain from sexual activity, but he ignored this warning. When the doctor discovered that the nobleman had done it in his urine, he advised the doctor. 3 days later, he died. And unfortunately, this prognosis proved to be correct. On the other hand, medieval doctors believed that a lack of sex was a medical problem. Celibacy was potentially dangerous for health, especially for young men. Prolonged celibacy meant an accumulation of excessive amounts of semen in the body, which negatively affected work and could damage other parts of the body. It could cause pain, anxiety, weight loss, and in the most severe cases, death. Although celibacy was highly valued in medieval society as a spiritual virtue, from a medical point of view, it was considered the cause of death in the most famous case of death from abstention.